Hello everyone, my name is Mahadi Litiye. On behalf of my group, I will be presenting on funding in higher education since 1994. Herewith is a list of my content. I will begin with introduction, administration process, NSFAS, corruption, accessibility, closing comments and recommendations, and lastly, it will be vote of thanks. What do I mean by funding, or what does funding mean? It is money provided especially by an organization or government for a particular purpose. The student financial aid or student grants, which are bursaries or scholarships given to deserving students, especially first years who come from disadvantaged backgrounds or who have demonstrated academic excellence. This I quote from CORE 2016. Financial aid is used as a support scheme to help students continue their studies and increase student retention in higher education institutions. What has the government done? The government came up with NSFAS, it came up with presidential scholarships, and these are provided mostly to students who also come from poor or deprived rural backgrounds to pursue graduate studies locally and abroad. I will discuss this further in the next slides. Access to higher education is an important constituent in solving the multitudes of social and economic problems that South Africa faces. But access is inhibited in two crucial ways. First, there are not enough universities, colleges, and higher learning institutions in South Africa to accommodate all applicants. Second, the willingness of young people coming from destitute areas to attend tertiary education institutions is stymied if they do not have access to the funding necessary to engage in university study. The sheer numbers who require funding and the limited funds available mean that there is not enough money to fund all students. So a need to investigate alternative and innovative models of student funding within higher education was then created in urgency. Higher education has become a global issue. It's a global issue, but it is especially difficult in developing countries. Higher education is more costly than all other levels of education. Central government budget contributions, tuition fees, and state loans are all sources of funding. We also have presidential scholarships, which are often provided to students from poor or deprived rural backgrounds to pursue graduate studies locally or abroad. One of the challenges, which is a major one, facing prospective university students is the need to procure funding for their studies. Indeed, demand for funding for students to access higher education far exceeds supply in South Africa. And one solution has been the creation of a government loan scheme, which is the National Students Financial Aid Scheme, NSFAS. But unfortunately, this scheme does not cover all students. I will explain what NSFAS is. It's the National Student Financial Aid Scheme, which is a bursary scheme funded by the Department of Higher Education and Training for those who do not have financial means to fund their studies and cannot access bank funding, study loans, or bursaries. But there's a positive effect to this NSFAS. It goes way beyond tuition fees. It goes to as far as accommodation, food, which one would not afford without NSFAS. What is corruption? Corruption is a form of dishonesty or criminal offense undertaken by an individual or an organization in power, usually involving bribery. Corruption has had an upper hand in higher education institutions, more especially whereby the lecturers would link the question papers and expect students to bribe them. But in our case, funding. Also, some students do not deserve to get the NSFAS sponsorship, but because of corruption, they end up being sponsored, yet they do not qualify. Accessibility, which comes from the word access, is defined as the means or the opportunity to approach or enter a place. It can also be a state of quality of being approachable. Access to higher education can be defined as affording learners the means of opportunity to obtain higher education. In the past years, higher education was reserved only for the elite and upper class citizens. Recently, the government has made an effort to afford the majority of citizens access to higher education. The scenario at UNISA can be explained by the fact that the government funding has not yet improved. The majority of students are either supported by their families or work to pay for their education. Educational materials are also not delivered until payments have been paid, and this delay the students to finish their courses on time. I also made a research and realized that there's one student who had a similar case in the past with the allowance arriving late, which caused the learning process to be delayed. She also said that due to the high cost of books in many retailers, the allowance they were receiving at the time was insufficient and couldn't cover everything required for the numerous modules. Financial assistance demand is outstripping the amount provided by the nationwide Student Financial Aid Program, implying that financial aid would not be sufficient to support all students. The transformation in higher education in South Africa, in terms of funding, has many challenges that still need to be transformed because funding is still a barrier for many students. There are qualifications that do not qualify for assistance from National Student Financial Aid Scheme, such as BTECs, and after completing undergraduate qualification, many students don't further their studies because of lack of funding. In recent years, there has been an increase in funding available to higher education students, but more needs to be achieved to achieve the objective of free education to graduates. As per my research, it has become very apparent that the state should aim to improve access to higher learning and invest in producing more graduates. This will have a knock on effect in the sense that a more educated society is more likely to thrive. The availability of education in general and higher education in particular have huge implications on society in general. The general sentiment deduced from the response that I got from my groupmates is that the average student is highly dissatisfied with efforts made to enhance access to higher learning. Thank you.